Sarah Fedorchuk. I'm the Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for North America for the Mosaic Company. First of all, Mosaic has almost a 60-year operating history in Saskatchewan between Mosaic and its predecessor companies. And about a decade ago, we started our multi-billion-dollar expansion in Saskatchewan. And really the reason is that Saskatchewan is home to one of the best potash ore bodies in the world. And not only that, but we have a long history, a skilled labor pool to pull from, and also just fantastic technology. We've been building really a mine of the future at our K3 facility in Esterhazy using the best of automation and really digitally transforming how we operate here in Canada. The entirety of our potash operation at the time of investment was in Canada. So it was really kind of our home base for our potash business. And again, it's resource rich. And to say that that doesn't factor significantly into any foreign investment decisions isn't really realistic. So when you pair the ore body with relatively stable government and a workforce that's readily available, it really equals really easy decision for companies like Mosaic to invest in Canada and in Saskatchewan. So I think a couple things. At the time, we were getting expansion credit from the government of Saskatchewan for the first few years of our expansion program here in the province. That unfortunately was sunsetted quite a few years ago. And so now it's really just about lowering our cost per ton in order to become more globally competitive. Frankly, right now, I think we have a lot of concerns around our competitiveness in our Canadian operations, and lots of that has to do with a drastically shifted tax regime than we started our expansion program under a decade ago. Part of it is the layering of different environmental regulations between the province and the federal government. Some of the advantages, though, are we are extremely close. I mean, frankly, we're a mining company that's just is also linked in with the agriculture industry very closely, and so one of our main markets is the North America Midwest, in particular in the US. And so to be that close to a huge portion of our customer base, over 50% of our product goes into the US. And so to be that close to some of our US customers is a real positive. There's also a relatively stable transportation network in Canada. I know a lot of times we talk about delays and labor action and blockades. When you actually look worldwide, we do have a really great rail network. It definitely comes at a price. It's very expensive, especially when you look at the transportation costs of our competition around the world. However, we also know that it's relatively reliable. And so that is actually also a competitive advantage, although I think most shippers do like to complain about our rail network in Canada to a great extent. I think the other thing that is really a competitive advantage, and I think that the trends in 5 to 10 years are really going to show this, is that the Canadian resource sector is the most sustainable in the world. And so we really have cutting edge technology when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, all of these key buckets. And right now, because we're in the commodity sector, we're not getting a price differential from our customers. But I think in 5 to 10 years, customers worldwide are going to really see the value in buying a more sustainable product. And so we're hoping that eventually all of this extra attention and money that we're putting into our sustainability targets actually starts to pay us dividends at some point. I really think so. And I think where we kind of are even hearing from the investment community, 5 to 10 years ago, no shareholder was asking about our environmental social governance strategy and what we were doing to better become stewards of our resources. And now it's one of the main questions we get when we're talking to analysts. And really, it's indicative of other things. If you're having environmentally sustainable productions, you're really becoming sustainable in a variety of other areas as well, including cost, safety. You're minimizing risk or the possibility of an environmental impact to your bottom line. And so it's really important for us to keep focused. I think where the pain points are going to be for the Canadian resource sector is in today's market, we're not getting an extra bump in prices because we're producing our products sustainably. And so for the short to medium term, those are really competitive disadvantages, the extra money that we might spend in managing waste or incorporating new technology into our operations. In the potash industry, we're competing against mainly the Russians and the Belarusians, who have a much lower cost to produce and much less focus on environmental or labor standards than we would here in Canada. So I think, the short-term trend that we're seeing with the pandemic is that people have a really renewed, sharper focus on food security. I think that when we were seeing grocery store shelves bare and in all of the jurisdictions where we operate, we managed to get essential business designation. And it really kind of put a finer point that we're part of the overall food supply chain. And what we do is really important. And when there was so much chaos and uncertainty in the world, the one thing that wasn't going away is people's need to have a sustainable food source. And so I think that is really kind of top of mind in a lot of the communities where we have customers and also where we operate, is just how important that food story is across the world. I think some other global trends that we're really seeing is that we see a lot of development in regions of the world where maybe environmental sustainability isn't top of mind. And so they are closer to some pretty key markets for us. So they have that advantage. And then they also have the short-term advantage of not having to focus on environment and regulations, and also have some unfair advantages when it comes to even governance around their company and who's the owner of the company and relationships internally with governments. And so when you look at all of that, I think that for the resource sector in Canada and in North America, we're under more pressure to produce at a lower cost to be able to compete with those producers in developing countries. But right now, there might not be even an awareness of how pressured the Canadian resource sector is when it comes to those challenges. I think the other thing that we're really seeing as a global trend is, companies' involvement in the communities that they operate in. We have an Indigenous Engagement strategy that we're quite proud of here at Mosaic. And I think that worldwide, all of a sudden, there's a bigger focus in how we work with Indigenous peoples around the world. And all of a sudden, it's not just a Canadian issue. I think, we're seeing it in Brazil, Australia. There's a real focus in how we really engage those local communities in a robust way with how we're operating. I think that it is an advantage. I think that to have a more diverse workforce is obviously a huge advantage, and there's a great return both socially and for the business when you're engaging a more diverse workforce. But I think it's something that perhaps Canadians don't realize is we're really on the leading edge of those conversations and figuring out how to engage all communities in the resource sector, not just certain ones. And it's, I think because we're so forward thinking when it comes to that piece, there's going to be a lot of advantages for us later on down the road. So our biggest mining operations in Canada is at Esterhazy. And because we have such a long history there, our hiring in that area tends to be, or traditionally has been, pretty multi-generational. So we have fourth generation employees working at our Esterhazy site. I think where we are challenged is to be more inclusive in our hiring practices, and that is something that we have been really focused on tackling over the last few years. I think the second piece is kind of that mid-level technical talent has always been a challenge for us to hire and retain that, just because Esterhazy is considered a more rural area. And so that's, I think, the kind of two buckets of our focus when it comes to talent. I would say, in 2009, 2010, when we were hiring 1,000 people in 18 months, we were really challenged to attract and retain employees. Now, because we've seen a slight down cycle in our markets, as well as the impacts of COVID-19, it's been much easier to hire talent than it was, I would say, even 3 or 4 years ago. So, using Mosaic as an example, we've spent $5 billion in the province of Saskatchewan over the last decade, and that's been hundreds of jobs. It's really guaranteed the future of our mining operations in Canada for the next 50 years. And so I totally understand where people's concerns are with foreign investment. And there definitely has to be governance around, the how and the why. However, when you look at the opportunities that leads to for, our citizens in these communities, and the opportunities for career paths that are really innovative and unique for Canadian citizens, I think the good outweigh the bad. The other thing I would really say is, a misconception around investment is that the Canadian resource sector is some of the most sustainable and innovative in the world. And so we really want to make sure that those investment dollars are coming here so we can continue that. As we're sending things to other countries that might not have our record of sustainability, they're not going to be concerned about greenhouse gas emissions or water usage or people impact by their extraction sector. And so to ensure that, climate change knows no boundaries. And I think that sometimes Canadians are almost ashamed of the resource sector instead of really embracing it. And I think it's really important that we realize that those investment dollars coming here, actually, it's good for Canada, but it's also really good for the world, that we continue to be a player in the world market when it comes to our resource sector. I think the value of investing in Canada is Canadians have a really long history of being a mining nation, especially in Western Canada. We have, a really great knowledge base with our employees. We have a stable, relatively stable government structure in Canada, which not a lot of places have. We have ease of access to lots of key markets. And so I would say that, although, of course, every jurisdiction has its challenges, Canada overall is a stable, safe, really clean environment to do business in.